Welcome everyone to this evening's event. I am Scott Edgar. I'm the Assistant Arts and Cultural Programmer at Belfast Linen Hall Library. For those of you unfamiliar with the library, we're the oldest such institution in Belfast, and we are the only library in Ireland that still draws a proportion of our income from membership. So if you like this evening's event, please visit our website and you can find out more there about becoming a member. For now, I'll keep everyone on mute. If you've got questions or comments throughout the event this evening, you can type them into the chat box and we will get back to them at the end if time permits. This evening, we've two guests joining us to really have a deep dive into the Northern Ireland political collection. We've done a series of talks relating to the collection over the last year. They've been very popular, but tonight is a real chance for us to explore exactly what the collection is and the kind of things that you can find in there to help with your research or even just to pique your curiosity. Dr. Gordon Gillespie holds a PhD in politics from Queen's University Belfast. He's a writer and academic and a visiting scholar at the Institute of Irish Studies at Queen's. Among Gordon's published works is Years of Darkness, The Troubles Remembered from 2008, and 2009's A Short History of the Troubles. He's also the co-author of the 1999 publication Northern Ireland, A Chronology of the Troubles. Dr. Kris Brown lectures in politics at Ulster University. He's a researcher in the Transitional Justice Institute. He obtained a PhD from Queen's University Belfast in 2001 before taking up a research fellowship in the Institute of Irish Studies in 2006. He later joined Ulster University in 2008 as a research fellow in the Transitional Justice Institute, later becoming a lecturer in politics in the School of Criminology, Politics and Social Policy. Both gentlemen have played vital roles within the Northern Ireland political collection at the Linen Hall Library, lending their considerable expertise to the project. This year marks the 20th anniversary of the Troubled Images Project, a series of political posters and artwork within the collection. And we'll hear much more about all of this over the course of the evening. But for now, I will hand you over to the much more knowledgeable Dr. Gordon Gillespie and first Dr. Kris Brown. Sorry, Kris, you're on mute there.
All right, okay. Should be unmuted now. Can you hear me okay? Yep. Great. And I'm going to attempt to share my screen because what I'm going to show you is much more interesting than my face, I can tell you. You talked about a deep dive into the Northern Ireland political collection. Such a task would take weeks and months. I'm going to give you a bird's eye overview and a little bit of a skip across the surface of some of the holdings within the political collection, and also talk about some of the values that enabled this collection to exist, values treasured by the Linen Hall Library. So, yep, a little more information about me, just so you can see my relevance to this talk. I worked in the Northern Ireland political collection as an assistant between 2001 and 2005. But I first effectively fell in love with the collection and its holdings as a student in the 90s, the early 90s. And during Robert Bell's period as keeper of the collection, I was just entranced by its holdings, by the atmosphere and the ethos of the place. I think many people were. I've used it as an academic since 2006, but nowhere near as much as I'd have liked to. I'm not going to dive into the history of the Linen Hall Library, except to touch on a few points of importance within the sort of DNA of the institution that have replicated their way down through the centuries to the present and formed part of the reason why the Northern Ireland political collection came into existence. The library itself, formerly the Belfast Reading Society, was an expression of a wider European and North American movement for self-improvement. It's certainly much influenced by Enlightenment values of an inquiry and the pushing of knowledge, pushing the boundaries of knowledge into sometimes contested areas. The people who set it up were skilled craftsmen, artisans, the rising bourgeoisie, if you like. They cherished education and inquiry, and it spread. And this reading society, the Belfast Library and Society for Promoting Knowledge, was a reflection of that. They certainly held progressive, but also radical values, exemplified by their second librarian, Thomas Russell, who was a United Irishman. Now, the collection of political material, including radical political material, is not something new. All libraries in Ireland and Britain have been acquiring the likes of political pamphlets, periodicals, and ephemera down through the years. These pieces of what Dr. Johnson called fugitive pieces, leaflets, unbound material that would otherwise evaporate from history if someone wasn't assiduously trying to collect and preserve it. And so in many libraries in Northern Ireland, you'll find very radical and sometimes very powerfully argued and presented material, such as the Northern Star, produced by the United Irishmen, the Anti-Union, which began in 1799, produced by those opposing the Act of Union. And there's nothing new under the sun. You'll find plenty of political autobiographies from the long 18th century, if you like, in many libraries, including cash-in autobiographies by informers, such as Edward John Newell. And some of these periodicals, lacking in the technological production values of today, nevertheless, did attempt to engage their readers pictorially, sometimes very strongly. And more than that, many of these publishers were themselves involved in a very complicated relationship with the state. The state was viewed as something to be suspicious of, something that was actively attempting to hound you out of your publishing trade. But sometimes also the state or members of the establishment could be patrons and benefactors. Waddy Cox was certainly aware of this risky business of radical publishing. He served time on the pillory in Dublin for what this little sign there says is a wicked and seditious libel. But if we leap ahead past a period in which access to libraries was really for the reading classes, despite the earnest activities of journeymen and the rising bourgeoisie, most libraries were rather reserved, quiet, well-funded places, but not places for open inquiry by the great mass of the wider public. When we move into the 20th century, particularly around the period of the Troubles, we find that the public library service, designed for the citizens of Belfast and Northern Ireland, felt the strain from the explosion of political radicalization and political violence. As this quote from the Belfast Education and Library Board puts it, staff feel increasingly uneasy when working in the centre of Belfast and other sensitive areas until 8 p.m. A great proportion of the staff are young women, and I'm sure some of the young men felt exactly the same way, feel increasingly at risk from hazards when passing through darkened and virtually deserted streets. Outreach by libraries was massively curtailed. Mobile services were stopped or limited. If borrowers wanted to come to libraries, they were often searched at the door, particularly of the bigger libraries like Belfast Central Library. And as well, access to material related to firearms and explosives was on highly restricted loan. And I can remember, still it was only 15 or 20 years ago that the political collection's copy of the Anarchist Cookbook had a big plastered sticker on it saying, not for, no pages may be photocopied from this text. So it was I'm trying to paint this sort of a picture of the context for libraries generally in Northern Ireland, but Belfast particularly in this period, due to the ever-present threat of bombs, Many valuable resources in libraries had to be moved out and into storage, such as in the Central Library. Their fine book materials were moved to Aldergrove Airport. Some of the libraries were themselves damaged by attacks. They were damaged by car bombs, which were aimed at buildings or targets near to the libraries rather than being aimed at the libraries themselves, although there were directed incendiary attacks on libraries in the early 1970s. Similar issues applied to the Linden Hall. It was damaged by car bombs in Belfast city centre, and also quite late in the Troubles, a directed incendiary attack in the early hours of New Year's Day in 1994, which came within an ace of destroying most of the collections of the library. The IRA was responsible and later apologised. But there were other difficulties for branch libraries too. They often had to make difficult decisions during periods of protest and paramilitary funerals when closure was expected, even though it ran against the commands from your own management and bureaucracy. And tragically, libraries could also be a site of ambush too. Attacks on the security forces who were maybe called out over a call about damage to the library property or vandalism or burglary. And what they found was actually an ambush instead. But the Northern Ireland political collection was a sturdy weed which thrived in this period. And a story which can only be semi-apocryphal, I think it's actually quite true, is that Jimmy Vitti was handed a civil rights leaflet in a bar. And curious and inspired, he tasked the staff to go out and collect similar material. What volunteers discovered was, quote, in the words of John Gray, a hive of publishing activity. This was fueled not just by local political upheaval, but also international revolutionary ideas and forms current at the time. And perhaps most importantly it was technologically enabled by cheaper printing, silk screen printing, use of the offset lithopress, and even the cheaper still end of the scale, the use of photocopiers, mimeographs, and spirit fluid duplicators, the old Banda machines, had purple ink and smelt strongly of alcohol. So the volunteers who went out to look for material encountered a vast and bubbling marketplace of ideas from left to right, from Republican through Marxist, through Unionist, through Loyalist, from militant to moderate. There was an enormous range of material being produced. But once you're out producing or gathering material, you have to think about what you're going to do with it then. And in 1970, Paula Hard was appointed reference librarian and took over responsibility for this nascent collection. The basic strategy was to acquire first and worry about fuller organization later. A sort of strategy which was often still the order of day when I was an assistant. We were running out of room, didn't stop us collecting material. Resourcing issues for this independent library, Linden Hall, did lead to organizational issues, organizational of the collection, I mean. There was a very basic cataloging and preservation process, which meant that it must have been more difficult for people accessing the collection to find material. Most threatening of all, though, was the fact that the library itself was very close to closure in 1981. Funds were found over the years due to the hard work of the staff, and a revived institution was able to put the political collection on a better footing and give it a higher profile through the 80s. They were able to track down the alphabet soup of organizations responsible for publication. They're able to add bibliographic and cataloging details to this material. And by 1981 itself, you had 10,000 items approximately, but with only one librarian working part-time. Fast forward 20 years and there was 250,000 items and 3 permanent staff members. And there are approximately 350,000 items now. So why was the Linden Hall Library so well placed to collect material? Well, obviously, the independent self-governing status of the library gave it some latitude and gave it some distance from the state. John Gray also alluded to the laissez-faire style of its governance in this period too. And both these factors meant that there were little constraints on the project of acquisition, but there was something more to that as well. The library's own embedded values and its very multifaceted history, the differing facets of its history, helped to assuage potential critics, helped to dampen down suspicion. On the one hand, a radical historical linkage that got its librarian, Thomas Russell, hanged. So its values in history were immediately recognized as being rather radical. But on the other, it was also a long-lived, familiar institution to the citizens of Belfast, which was patronized by members of the establishment. But why were other institutions not collecting? Well, in fact, some of them were. It's just they were doing it in a rather more episodic, piecemeal fashion, and certainly not throwing spotlight on their holdings. But nobody was collecting like the Lindenhall Library. And indeed, as the political turmoil continued and violence escalated, public institutions like the various library services and the Public Records Office were more cautious. And coming from the opposite end, they may indeed have been viewed with suspicion by participants in the conflict. Indeed, most libraries are controlled by, or at least linked, even if it's only at arm's length, but they're still linked to the state. And the state is unlikely to acquire and make available subversive and seditious literature, which is compounding a war of bullets and bombs with a war of words. And the legal status of material that was being collected was also questionable. The leading Irish Republican paper at the time, United Irishman, was still banned under the Special Powers Act. That's not to say that organizations didn't attempt to acquire material, but there were repercussions for them. In the 1970s, the police seized material from Prony, which had been donated by Sinn Féin. And as I've read, and I was quite surprised by this, the archivist who was responsible for working on that donation felt that he had to leave his position and his home for a job in Great Britain as a result of that quiet little raid. So there were real difficulties for many organizations in acquiring this material. The Lindenhall almost had its collar felt as well, but due to its connections within the establishment, if you like, it was able to get a sort of letter of protection provided by the Attorney General. Now, Robert Bell has said that all we have done is to preserve what was published and distributed on the streets of our own city, and it was not that difficult. Indeed, whenever I worked as an assistant, I would often go out to many, many different political organizations who cut right across the political spectrum, and I was always greeted with hospitality and helpfulness. So that much is sort of true, but I think Robert's also been too modest. The early years of reaching out to groups, moving around Belfast and Northern Ireland, would have had real problems and incited real concerns in the staff. Violence was commonplace. We often forget that, just how bad it was. And watchful suspicion was at a very high level. So it takes a degree of good communication skills and diplomacy to undertake this task. It also takes foresight and imagination, a vision to see the usefulness of this material and the risks of its disappearance. It's often said that you can only tell a good librarian 100 years after they're dead. It also, I think you also, for whatever period of the Troubles you were working or through the peace process, diligence and persistence are very necessary. Tracking down and soliciting material, you have to be diligent. You have to be make sure that publishers, who often have far different things on their mind, priorities, make sure that they supply you with those gaps in your holdings. I think there's a set of values which have informed the political collection's development. A set of values that are embedded in the Linden Hall's own set of values, but refined for the political collection. I was reading around a lot of material for this talk. I read stuff by Joan Cullen, also Vaughan Murphy, who's a librarian in the political collection. John was a deputy librarian. But the people who've probably written most about the political collection and its holdings are John Gray, former librarian, and Robert Bell, former keeper of the political collection. And they kept sort of orbiting around many of the same values that informed the collection's approach. Firstly, there was the tradition embedded in what they were doing of fostering inquiry, a tradition that's linked right the way back to the founding of the Linden Hall Library. Next came integrity. People would develop relations with people so that they knew that they would be fairly dealt with, and that the material they were providing would be well looked after, properly conserved, and made available to anybody who wished to see it. They also stuck to a strict political impartiality. This was a quiet but active neutrality. It was not a passive sit on your rear end and wait for people to send you stuff. No, it was all about fostering relations. It was all about making contacts. So quiet but active and neutrality informed much of the work. And the independence of the library itself, both political, independent from any particular political viewpoint or the state, and independence from larger bureaucratic systems which might stifle collection of material by libraries within the wider public sector. Now, I'm going to give you an overview of some of the holdings of the collection, just so you get an idea of what's in there. These are not only fantastic documents for the researcher, some of them are very colorful, very engaging for the purposes of exhibition. The backbone of the political collection is what's called the P series, in which the books and pamphlets are organized, and just about any political grouping or viewpoint is represented there, and I've produced or I've displayed some from the official Republican movement and the old British and Irish Communist organization there, a small group but very influential one, as well as they also collect material by the government, whether it's the Irish, British or Northern Ireland government. So there's the Ulster 71 booklet as well. But for me, one of the most fascinating and important collections is the periodical collection. There are maybe 120,000 issues of these, individual issues, not duplicates, and with more than 2,000 titles. There is an enormous range of viewpoints here. They're extremely useful for the researcher for charting the development of ideas over time, not only sort of generally, but within organizations, be it the UVF or the IRSP, all manner of political, or the Ulster Unionist Party. All really is a sort of week by week, month by month, useful mechanism for studying change within our politics. And some of the imagery and the symbols that they display are, very engaging as well. The range of perspectives is so wide from this periodical collection. It's not just, there's some Republican material or some Sinn Féin material, or there's some loyalist material, material from the UUP, DUP, etc. You go for a deep dive into some of the little niches and fringe viewpoints and sectors within political groupings. So the Captive Voice and Glór Gafa was produced by Irish Republican prisoners. It was the Journal of Irish Republican Prisoners, and there's their Captive Voice showing their tunnel they were digging, which was later discovered before the escape attempt was made in Long Cache H Block. And then some niche political organizations like the Ulster Independence Committee, there with the figure who looks rather like a Teutonic knight bowing in obeisance before an Ulster flag. That was a journal started by a group of frustrated Unionists and Loyalists who felt the Anglo-Irish Agreement was effectively ending the Union anyway, and to preserve Ulsterness and Ulster Britishness, they should embark on a path of separatism. And politics is not solely about orange, green, and all the permutations of that. It's also about left-right issues. People often forget that the Northern Ireland Labour Party was getting 100,000 votes by 1970. It was a significant political force, only to be eclipsed by the furore of the Troubles. So you find plenty of material which is arguing from a left or a right-wing perspective, or is engaged in the politics of gender. There are many feminist periodicals, such as Women's Action, produced by the Belfast Women's Collective. And Socialist Monthly, not simply a periodical of the Northern Ireland Labour Party, but of the left-wing tendency within it. And you can see this is rather Marxist social constructionist style illustration there, with some very powerful slogans. Smash, boss, rule, for one. And if you look at the figure on the right, seems to be stomping on the body of a bird. What the heck does that mean? Well, if you look along the slogan on the pickaxe, it says, crush the pregnant dove of moderation. I have never been able to find the source of that quotation, but it's unlikely to bring people to the barricades, I think. The leaflet collection is enormous, enormous. Obviously, the political collection has tens of thousands of election leaflets, but there are so many more too. I've just put a range of those there. Leaflets by the Peace Train organisation, which was campaigning against the bombing of the Dublin-Belfast line. More modern one about Brexit. A short leaflet stroke pamphlet, which was produced by those supportive of Billy Wright, arguing that he was in fact a virtuous individual who was also a man of God as well as a political soldier. And in the middle there, it doesn't seem particularly well designed, but it's by the SDLP. It was produced by the SDLP campaigning for a yes vote in the referendum on the Belfast Agreement. What I like about it is that, yes, it's arguing for power sharing, and it's selling it to us by depicting a family going round and round on a merry-go-round. I'm not sure if there was meant to be a hidden message about the future of the devolutionary settlement in that image. There's also huge photographic holdings. The biggest collection is the Pacemaker Press, also known as the Victor Patterson Archive, but I've put up two other examples here, one from Frankie Quinn collection, and one from not a professional photographer, but an activist, Tony Carrer, the late Tony Carrer, who she worked to, she campaigned against military installations in South Armagh. Photography often charts highly tragic episodes or important people, VIPs. What I most get out of the photographic holdings in the Linden Hall is the charting of the securitization of life in Northern Ireland, and it's a very useful resource for that, as those two images show. This may be a library, but it also collects three-dimensional material, three-dimensional artifacts, from the large to the small, from road signage to coinage. But what these two images have in common is they're both an example of culture jamming, a common practice within many of the symbolic or artifact representations in the political collection. Culture jamming is when a political activist takes a familiar symbol or sign or brand and subverts it, twists it, changes it, or adds to it in a way that undermines its meaning and imposes the meaning of the activist. So you have there a road sign with a sniper in the middle, and these signs were set up in various points of South Armagh. The meaning being, warning, sniper at work. And very common, common memory for most of us of a certain age, coinage which has been stamped or defaced with political slogans or initials. It doesn't really happen now, I have to say, but right up until the early 2000s, it did. The bottom pound coin there has RIRA on it, Real Irish Republican Army. So it was still a practice up until the early 2000s at least. Other artifacts deepen your understanding of something in sometimes surprising ways. This is a master key set from Springfield Road Barracks. The keyring itself is about the size of your fist, and the keys are 3 and 4 deep around it. That shows you just how much security went into keeping people inside a police station and also keeping people who might have wanted to get in out. Some most intriguing paper material in the collection are the jail communications, the comms. Basically smuggled jail letters, smuggled into prison or smuggled between prisoners. They were a way of communicating. They were also a way of having ideological or strategic discussions. They were written in tiny cramped handwriting on toilet roll or cigarette paper. And sometimes too, they were featured schematic drawings for the purposes of planning escapes. There's quite a bit of jailcraft as well. I think everybody who's over the age of about 50 remembers jailcraft from the Troubles, often in the forms of leather work, wallets, leather bangles and necklaces, or models made out of matchsticks. My favorite are the handkerchiefs, which prisoners decorated with felt tip pens and later sold on, way of passing the time but also raising funds. This particular handkerchief was produced by a UDA prisoner who went under the nickname or nom de guerre of Captain America. As he makes clear in this other handkerchief, Crumlin, where he satirizes the prisoner with the Marvel comic character Captain America. It's a very good rendition from the early 70s. And speaking of cartoons and comics, the collection also has a very large collection of original cartoon artwork from the likes of Martin Turner and Ian Knox, Royalfriars. I've chosen one of Cormac's cartoons here. He was a long-running cartoonist for Black Republican News. Very familiar to many readers. He also produced fanzines and graphic novels in the 70s too. But there were also works which were more in the more familiar graphic novel format. The image on the right is taken from For a Few Troubles More by Garth Ennis and John McCrae. And it was a fairly accurate, well-informed portrayal of ordinary life in Belfast in the late 80s and early 90s. Stamps. This is something that the Linen Hall taught me. I'd never seen these before. They're stickers, but they did actually function as stamps. Republicans sold these around Christmas time usually, and their supporters would buy them. It would be a way of raising funds, but also cocking snoot at the Royal Mail, because you applied these to the envelope, and members of the local Sinn Féin Cumann would then deliver them to the addresses on the envelope. So it's partly an act of resistance, partly an act of fundraising. And these were, I don't know if they're still running today, I have to tell you the truth, but they were certainly running through the 70s and 80s. But how can I mention stamps in December without thinking about Christmas cards and New Year's calendars? I have to say that the Christmas card is one of the most subverted, if that's the term to use, pieces of paper material that the political collection has. There are so many derivations of this, so many different types. Here we see Santa as an orange man complete with flute, but also as a victim of British Army oppression, shot from the rooftop as he was clambering down the chimney. There are so many different iterations of this that I could spend the whole presentation talking to you about Christmas cards and our politics, but I won't. And there you see an orange cross calendar. Again, calendar is very popular piece of fundraising material by all sorts of political organizations, and they're still producing them. Another graphically interesting object are vinyl. Yes, the collection also has CDs and cassettes, but as we all know, vinyl is just the right size for portraiture or cartoons or illustrations or symbols. Nice little artifacts. So it's not just the value of the songs themselves, which are a document of the times, but the imagery too. Very important little collection, I think. Shows how the conflict seeped its way into popular culture. This next object is a little difficult to catalog or categorize, rather. Yes, it's a pamphlet. It's not meant to be an actual book for use by children, and it was only produced in maybe about a half dozen copies. So it's an interesting oddity, a Republican ABC book. So it has A is for Armalite, that sends them all running, runs right the way through, mentioning Paisley, mentioning the Brits, etc., etc. Maybe it was a trial run at something else they were planning to distribute, but there are only a very few copies of them. I'll more or less not go through any more of their holdings, other than to say that the holdings are enormous. Personal institutional papers, obviously, in the library, newspaper clippings, 1,500 thematically organized volumes, exceptionally useful if you're studying the 70s and 80s. Videos, posters, which my colleague Gordon's going to talk about, as well as badges, bibs, candles, postcards, baton rounds, t-shirts, plaques, hats, souvenirs. Think of any object, think of how a political slogan can be attached to it, and it's almost certainly in the collection. This means that this is a very rich collection for the purposes of exhibition and for the purposes of developing educational outreach. Troubled Images was the first major project to emerge from the political collection in the 1980s, rebooted in 2000, 2001. But there've been other forms of outreach, if you like. The Divided Society project was a digitization project, but not simply to preserve, but also to make available to people. It's available online. I do recommend, if you're interested in this, to join up to it. It's free if you're in the UK. It also had an oral history arm attached to it, as well as educational outreach. So the political collection has been doing this for decades. And certainly if you read some of the material written about the political collection in the 70s and 80s, it said that this was a unique set of holdings. Is it still unique? I think it is, but it's no longer alone. There are other projects, one in Cyprus, which has only started recently, one in Lebanon, in Beirut, UMAM, it's Arabic for community, the UMAM Documentation Center, which has been compiling books, periodicals, ephemera, as well as artifacts in relation to the Lebanese Civil War. The image on the right is of the bus that was attacked by Maronite Christian militiamen in 1974-75. It's a bus full of Palestinian workers. Effectively, that was the trigger point for the Lebanese Civil War. If you were going to do something like that in Northern Ireland, all I can think of is if you reached back in time with some sort of time scoop and picked up a one of the houses from Bombay Street after it had been burnt. That's the closest analog I can think of. It was that object represents the trigger point of their civil war. Very powerful image. So who uses this collection? Let me speak about the people who used it when I was there. Obviously students, historians and academics from across the globe, researchers from all sectors, journalists from radio. It's a hell of a job trying to describe some of these artifacts for a listening audience, I have to tell you. From radio, TV, and from newspapers from Ireland, Europe, North America, universities from the same area. Basically, the interest is global. And obviously, you attract a lot of interest from political parties and pressure groups who are doing their own research. And they do seem to value this material. Jerry Adams said that the collection was it represented a spectrum of political thinking to the extent that it was virtually a vast history book. Whereas Ian Paisley said he found the Lindenhall Library indispensable, delivering the goods and the goodies. Now, certainly when I was there, neither of these two gentlemen came in to do some research, but many members of the political parties did do that. And one group of people who assiduously came in to the collection were journalists. Peter Taylor said that the Lindenhall Library was of immense value because it had material that was unavailable anywhere else, and yet was vital in seeking accuracy and objectivity in such difficult and contentious a conflict. What about the future of the political collection? Obviously, there's going to be continued scholarly use, but new acquisitions are being added to all the time. The collection has recently acquired papers of Kris Ryder, papers relating to the Guildford 4 case, more cartoons from Royalfriars and John Kennedy, papers of Judith Gillespie of the organisation Women Together, and papers from Geraldine Finucane. So it's always acquiring material. And it's also acquired accredited museum status, which will hopefully open the doors to even more outreach and more use of the material, the huge amounts of material within the collection for the purposes of exhibition. I realize that space is at a premium in the Lindenhall Library, but there's so much it could have shown. Thinking about the future, and I promise I'm finishing in a moment, thinking about the future a little more, this collection is going to be of immense use if there is some sort of joined up legacy process that gets off the ground in Northern Ireland. I realise the Stormont House Agreement is, let's say, stalled, and indeed part of it, the prosecution pillar, may have been excised. But if there is to be any future dealing with the past mechanisms, then the examination of key issues, themes, and events will remain part of that. And the collections in the Lindenhall Library will be able to impart new information, contextualize other information, and add corroboration to investigations and evidence from other quarters. The collection could also contribute to a proposed timeline, which was part of the Stormont House Agreement. That may wink out of existence. My colleague Gordon is going to be well placed to produce that because he's published his own chronology. But there are so many more timelines within the political collection itself. The Fortnight magazine had its own monthly continuous running chronology of the conflict and politics in Northern Ireland. And I know that the collection will form a useful part of dealing with the past because it was already done that even 20 years ago. The Corey collusion inquiry sent researchers into the collection, as did the Savile inquiry, researchers from both the Ministry of Defence and the families, police officers from the police ombudsman and the historical inquiries team visited and make use of holdings, as did numerous lawyers. And there were many community-led commemorations and inquiries which sought information from the political collection as well. I think the greatest strength of the collection has been its accessibility to people, as well as its assiduousness in acquisition. It has exhibited strength as a place of record in which you can people are able to shine a light on some of the darkest spots of our history, where you will be able to find information to challenge easy assumptions, to challenge stereotypes and mythology, to challenge selective history and correct selective history. That is going to be the role of the political collection, or as Robert Fisk puts it here, no politician, no government can conceal the sins and omissions of the past or conceal the possibilities of the future, when an ordinary member of the public can walk into the Lindenhall and find the record of what all sides said in 69 or 1974 or 1989 or today. And I think that is a fitting point at which to conclude my section of this talk. Thank you.
Thank you, Kris. We've got Gordon there. You were mentioned earlier in terms of the Trouble Images collection, and I think you are the man best placed to take us through some of that. All right, just come off mute there, Gordon.
Yeah, I'm just trying to work out how to share the screen here. Is it window I need to hit?
It should be desktop, and then yep, right, there you go. That? Yep, we got you now.
Okay. Okay. One of the major parts of the political collection is the Trouble Images project that is based on the political posters that have been collected over the years. And again, the first time that was put together was back in 1986 when Robert Bell, and I think I saw Robert's name there coming up in some of the comments. Robert was the first to try and shape the posters that had been collected. And at the time, he said every political confrontation which involves a battle for hearts and minds must use propaganda. Posters, leaflets, the covers of pamphlets, cards, and records all attempt to encapsulate a simple message clearly presented, which will provoke immediate responses. And you can see from what Kris was talking about, all of those things were covered. And there's some of the posters, Robert, with some of the posters that they used back in '86 in the background. And you know, some of those recurring images that we picked up on when we were doing the 2000-2001 collection of Trouble Images, and you can see in Robert's 1986 exhibition, they used this idea of barbed wire, and that was something we picked up on in 2000-2001, except we used the image of a piece of broken barbed wire. It's used in the exhibition poster there in 2001. And then again, when I did a school book aimed at 13, 14-year-olds, which was making use of the posters in the political collection, we again used this idea of the broken barbed wire. So there's some continuity and some change taking place over that period. So what we were trying to do then in 2000 at the time of that Troubled Images exhibition, again, it was Yvonne Murphy, who was the political collection librarian at the time, did an excellent job of bringing together the funding to actually make this take place and outlining the sort of objectives that we're trying to fulfill. And that included cataloging the material, digitizing the material, because inevitably it is ephemeral by its very nature, and that means it'll degrade and eventually fall apart. So you want to try and get some sort of a record of what the material looked like. Create a CD-ROM using the digitized material, and again, CD-ROM was something that was seen as cutting-edge technology at the time. And then separately from that, select material for an exhibition and create an exhibition catalog. So actually what we were doing there were three separate projects using the same material for different purposes. One, to create a CD-ROM, two, to create an exhibition, and along with that, create an exhibition catalog. And there you can see what the exhibition looked like in October 2001. As well as that, then Yvonne arranged to take the exhibition on tour around various parts of the world. And I think quite poignantly in Bethlehem at the Peace Centre there in 2007. And I was very proud actually to have something I wrote, the Gateway Statement, on display in the Bethlehem Peace Centre. And what I wrote was, this is art of a particular kind. The images presented in these posters are of a political, though not necessarily party political nature. They were designed to convey a message, to make the observer think, and often inspire them to a course of action. And we just want to show you some of the posters that are on display that were included in this exhibition, and they're still on display if you go into the library today. And again, we've got these contrasting images of the people's civil rights and people's democracy within a very short period of time, from late 68, 69, at the time just after the Derry Civil Rights March, where there's a protest march by students with the open hand being used in the poster. And by the time you get to 1969, then we're getting the clenched fist and a more threatening image being presented in the Smash Stormont PD poster. I think two posters that on the surface look quite similar. They both use these dramatic red, white, and black colors, but they're representing two traumatic events that took place in the Troubles, the Bloody Friday in 1972, and then a poster by People's Democracy London in 1974, remembering Bloody Sunday in 1972 as well. And then possibly the most traumatic poster that's on display, one that referred to the Le Mans incident. And Henry MacDonald, the noted journalist, said there are some stomach-churning images, such as the poster appealing for information about the IRA's bomb massacre at the Le Mans Hotel. Even today, the picture of that charred torso, it appears to have been a woman, accompanied by the repetition of the word murder, chills the blood. And then again, we've got the use of an existing image to be replicated and used in different ways. The famous shot of Joe McCann, the IRA official, IRA activist, which is then used to be turned into silkscreen posters. We actually included the one on the left in the exhibition. The one on the right is actually interesting as well. It uses a silver type of paint rather than the green one. But we went with the green one because it seemed slightly more iconic. Then again, we've got a couple of Unionist posters, one from the mid-60s, the O'Neillite period, talking about prosperity and the use of the signpost. And then possibly one of the most famous posters of the whole Troubles period, the Dublin Assist to Sunningdale Away Unionist poster from February 1974. Another depiction of Ian Paisley. There's an interesting little story behind this, in that we thought when we looked at the poster that it was Protestant Unionist or later possibly DUP poster that had been produced, and we actually sent a request to Peter Robinson to sign off so that we could use this, thinking that it was DUP. It then turned out that it had been produced by a gentleman called Patrick McGrath, who I think had just produced the posters as a financial venture. And so it was, it undercut the idea that this was, primarily a political thing. It was as much a financial project as anything else. Again, a couple of general election posters from 1983. The more common one, the one on the left, vote for Gerry Adams in West Belfast, and then an Irish language version, which is slightly different, but from the same Westminster election in 1983. But this was an interesting one that I spotted when I was writing some of the notes for this, and on the screen that we were looking at, it just came across as a brown blur. So I went and actually got the poster out and had a look at it. and some of the detail on it was great. If you look in the bottom center, there's the British GOC, Frank King, who was in charge of the British Army here at the time. And then on the, if you can spot it, yes, in the sort of just in the a third of the way across and a third of the way down, there's a poster which is actually used again within the Northern Ireland political collection. So you're seeing a depiction of a poster that we actually had in the collection. And again, you know, it was produced by Canadian war artist Joan Wanklin. And we actually thought we might send it to her to get it signed. And there happened to be an exhibition of her work in Ottawa at the time. And then sadly, we realized that the reason the exhibition was on was because she'd passed away. So the great idea had gone out the window. Another famous poster, the 1986 one produced by Cedric Wilson, Ulster Says No, and you've got this iconic image of tens of thousands of protesters, various estimates between 100,000 people and 200,000 people at the City Hall protesting against the Anglo-Irish Agreement at the end of 1985. Again, another interesting one, and this was spotted by John Gray. We were going through hundreds of Republican posters like this, and we thought they were connected to the either the 1981 or 82 hunger strikes. And John spotted that this was actually a very early one, produced by famous poster producer Danny Devaney, and it related to 1986 and the abolition of political status. So it's a very early Republican poster that is right at the start of that process that ends up in the hunger strikes in 1980 and 81. And again, we've got at the other end of that process, the death of Bobby Sands and this iconic image, which is still reproduced today, you know, 40 years on from the event. Another one which I spotted, I happened to be on holiday in America in 1995 and saw a lot of the famous prisoners of war missing in action American image relating to Americans who had supposedly been left behind after the Vietnam War. And this had been recycled and reused by the Ulster Democratic Party Loyalist Prisoners Association. And you can see they've clearly just largely lifted the image and recycled it for their own purposes. There's one by Royalfriars, the famous cartoonist from 1972, which is being used by for the Alliance Party. And again, you've got the barbed wire in the background. You've got the kids who are probably about sort of anywhere between 8 and 11 in front of the barbed wire. Another Royalfriars image, I've managed to find the original cartoon on the right, and you can see the way it's part of it has been lifted by the Unionist Party Vanguard and has been recycled. And this is obviously just after direct rule has been introduced and William Whitelaw becomes the first Northern Ireland Secretary of State. And you've got the version produced by originally by Royalfriars, and then the way that it's been changed to meet the purposes of Vanguard as a protest. So it goes from being the last chance saloon in the original Royalfriars cartoon to the dead end saloon in the Vanguard poster. It seems like quite a stock John Hume poster from 1994. What's interesting about it is the format that it's used. This is the first time that we really see these big corrugated plastic posters being used instead of the standard issue ones, which are generally a piece of paper which has been posted onto a piece of board and then stuck on a lamppost or wall or something like that. So this is a change. It's a more sophisticated format that's being used. It's more durable than the paper ones that had been used prior to that. 1996, with the emergence of the Northern Ireland Women's Coalition, and this was a poster that was produced by them. It's interestingly using the colours green, white, and violet, associated with the suffragettes, sometimes interpreted as standing for Give Women the Vote, GWV, and hence green, white, and violet. And this is the same colours were used by the Women's Coalition. And at this time, you know, they're saying wave goodbye to dinosaurs, obviously having to go at both the Unionist and Nationalist parties and calling on people to vote for something different. Famous poster from 1995. It was produced by University of Ulster, as it was at that time, student Paula McElroy. And you can see the one on the left is quite an interesting one, where it does a take on the American flag with the stars, with the stripes turning into a candle. And then you've got the stars on the top left. But as my colleague Alan Leonard, who's an American, pointed out, if you look at the stars, they've got 6 points on them, presumably representing Northern Ireland, rather than 5 points as they would have on the American flag. And then we have a later version for a more simple image on the right-hand side, which was produced in 2000 to mark Clinton's visit to Northern Ireland at that stage. Again, this is something that Alan Leonard and I picked up on and got it included in the exhibition. On the face of it, it doesn't appear to be a particularly interesting poster, but it captures the mood of a particular time. And if those of you who can think back to 1995, that period between the ceasefires and the bombs going off in London in February '96, that pressure from Sinn Féin to be included in talks in advance of weapons being decommissioned, and this particular poster kind of encapsulated that the zeitgeist of that particular time. This is one that was picked up by Kieran Crossey, who was working in the library at that time, sort of produced by the Irish Republican Socialist Party, Irish National Liberation Army, and it picks up on that sort of Stalinist Soviet type style. And you've got the spanner on one side, and you've got the automatic rifle on the other side, and it's linking the two, the armed struggle along with the political labourite, if you want, element. Again, another one that was picked up by Alan Leonard, and I remember when we were discussing this, Alan said, you know, what we don't have is an ordinary poster that was so common, the Belfast Telegraph poster that would tell you what the headline was for that day, and we didn't have anything really like that in the collection. And I thought that was a good catch in terms of an important type of poster that had appeared and we just took for granted during the course of the Troubles. But one thing we hadn't really paid an awful lot of attention to, because we're trying to get a balance and a wide range of opinion and different types of posters. One thing we kind of really didn't give too much attention to was the artistic merits of the posters. We tried to pick out the best ones that we thought there were, but sometimes some of the posters artistically weren't particularly inspiring. But the critic Giles Waterfield in the art newspaper actually gave us quite a good review and said the display of the often shocking material in this setting does not neutralize it, but gives these chronicles of hatred and combat a detached, dispassionate quality. This record of the Troubles allows the people of Northern Ireland to stand back from the present, not necessarily to admit that any particular cause is right or wrong, but to try to understand the efforts and problems confronting the individuals caught up in historical events. And at the end of the day, after the project was produced and went on display in March 2003, the library was awarded the prestigious Christopher Uritzbrig Memorial Prize, which aims to promote peace and reconciliation in Ireland, greater understanding between the peoples of Britain and Ireland, a closer cooperation between the partners of the European community, and hopefully that's still ongoing. There've been some large, big name winners of it in the past, including FSL Lyons, John White, Richard English, Stuart Parker, Brian Keenan, and Brian Field. So the library's in good company with some of those names. And just to conclude, you know, even in the age of digital technology and the internet and podcasts and all the rest of it, visual imagery can still be very powerful. The top two in the middle are not photographs that I took, the rest of them are, but you can see the sort of the range of things that this is still a format that is widely used to try and get across those sort of ideas and to try and encourage people to support a particular issue or a particular cause. So I'll just leave it with that. And I think Kris and I'd probably be open to taking questions if you have anything for us. So thanks very much.
Thank you, Gordon. Let me just check the chat here. I'm not sure if we had any questions come in. I think you probably saw the comment there referring to the employee from Pruney, which is quite a sad tale. Gentleman died 4 years later from a heart attack, blaming his bad health on what happened in the mid-70s in Northern Ireland, a hidden victim of the Troubles. We also had someone who updated us there on the stamps, saying that they only stopped 2 years ago, and that there's a book produced by Heinz-Jürgen Kumpf with the various issues from 1975 to 2019. But yeah, if anyone has any questions for either Gordon or Kris, feel free to either type them into the chat or just at this stage, I think you can take yourself off mute and ask in the room if you'd like to. Or perhaps it was such a great talk that we've covered all the bases.
Well, I'd just like to thank Karen McShane for telling me that the stamps were still going until a couple of years ago. Wouldn't have guessed that it lasted so long into the 21st century. I'm almost sad I didn't try them out now, actually, see how well it worked.
There is a question just come in there. How do you maintain the collection when so much material must be online today?
Put it like this, we're ex-employees of the Linen Hall. I put this very question to members of the Linen Hall when I speak to them. One chap who is also now left, Ross Moore, tried to download a lot of political material on YouTube to hard disk drives. I don't think that's now continuing. So really, I think the library's probably, my advice to it would be try and limit yourselves just to paper material for the moment, because you will never be able to crawl through the internet picking up political material. Just leave that to the Internet Archive, if anything. It's still very good. Internet Archive, I've even found the website of the defunct Ulster Democratic Party, which went into extinction 20 years ago, but you can still source its web page material on the Internet Archive. So I think the Linen Hall would be best place to just concentrate on paper material.
Robert has asked there, does someone still go out one day a week and visit the parties, etc.? I feel like I am the only employee of the library on here this evening, but as I'm solely based in events, I'm possibly not the best person to answer that. I do know that the library still has sort of really good channels of communication with the parties, and that the collection of items is still very much ongoing. As you saw there were some items relating to Brexit and things, so we are still collecting, but whether or not that is a regular thing that someone is still going out on a weekly or however long basis and doing that, I am not sure. But if I can find out, I will.
Well, another point, can you hear me there, Scott? Yeah.
Yep, I can hear you.
It's another point, I mean, just to go to the other extreme is, the existing material needs to be taken care of as well. And when that material was digitized for troubled images, that was 2000. I mean, if in a perfect world, if the money was available, that stuff should all be done again, because we're now 20 years on and technology is presumably gone forward in leaps and bounds. So, you know, I mean, if the money ever became available, I think, you know, all of that stuff should really be done again.
Yeah, I'm in complete agreement with that, and as I'm sure a lot of us on here know, it a lot of that does just come down to funding, really. There are big digitization plans ahead for the Linen Hall Library, and hopefully the NIPC will benefit from those. Someone here has asked about sensitive material, like the Boston collection. There must be some sensitive material that can't be released today. When would you envisage their release? Are either of you aware of any potential sensitive or embargoed material in the collection?
I'm saying nothing.
I don't know anyway, so I can't comment.
There'll be nothing like the Boston College tapes. But all put it like this, generally speaking, all libraries, all archives have embargoed material, often embargoed at the request of the donating body or the donating individual. That's speaking generally, of course.
Question here from Frank, which means nothing to me, but hopefully it will to you. Are there any references to the Long Kesh vodka oranges in any of the collections?
Is that injecting booze into oranges, Frank? If there is, I haven't encountered it in the political collection. But I'm sure anything about jail life is probably well represented within the collection of the Royalist newsletters and periodicals, probably. But if that's what you mean by vodka oranges, which was citrus fruit injected with vodka or gin, I don't know if that's what you mean, though. I've no that went on.
I'm not entirely sure if injecting citrus fruit with spirits is where we envisage this talk going this evening, but it has been a hugely entertaining and informative talk. I have learned a lot about the political collection, and I hope the comments coming through seem to suggest that other people have too. Frank has just added there, yes, and a double measure for the weekends. Hopefully, Frank, next time you're in, you can have a look in the political collection, see what you can find there.
And if that is indeed Robert Bell, who I met when I was 21 years old, doing my dissertation back in 1992. Good to hear from you again, sir, and thanks very much for all the help you've provided to me.
And I would like to thank both Kris and Gordon for joining us this evening. I'd like to thank everyone who's given up their time tonight and come along. We couldn't run these events without you, without your support. So I'd encourage you all to visit our website, view our upcoming list of events, find out more about what the library's doing, and also other information about the Northern Ireland political collection. All that's left for me to say this evening is enjoy the rest of your night, and thank you all very much again. See you all again soon. Thank you.